Good evening, Santa Fe. Welcome. Why cannabis? My name is Ken Sobel, and I've been asked to moderate the proceedings this evening, and I want to tell you how proud and happy I am to be here. My home is in California, and I'm a lawyer who practices in Arizona, California, and other states. I'm also someone who has quite a background in medical cannabis. I started the third dispensary in Arizona. We started the first infusion kitchen there. I've worked with in the community of San Diego with cultivation and also with dispensary there. And I've attended numerous conferences and spoken at many conferences throughout the United States. New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Denver, and so on. And when I was asked to moderate this panel, and I saw the cast of characters who Sacred Garden was bringing in, I said, wow. What you're going to have tonight before you are some panelists who have deep experience and deep knowledge in the cannabis industry and in the cannabis healthcare. And they are on par with those you'd find if you were in New York or San Francisco at a conference where they charge $500 or $1,000 for people to attend. And we're so blessed that Sacred Garden has brought this group together tonight to share their information and knowledge. We expect this to be interactive, so even though we have some planned part of the program, I'll do some introductions in a minute of our panelists. In a bit, they will do some self-introduction to describe what current activities they're involved in. And then we'll have a question and answer where I'll be asking them questions and they'll be giving answers. And at the end of the proceeding, we'll be also asking for your comments. So folks will be around with pen and paper, and you'll be able to write down your questions and submit them up front. We'll get to as many questions as we can. And when we're all done, I think the panelists will be happy to stay around and answer your individual questions. Before we get started, how many folks are here, are local, are Santa Fe? Raise your hands. How many from out of town? Welcome to all of you who probably traveled a bit in some not the best conditions, but how many of you yourself or know somebody who successfully uses cannabis because they have an illness or an injury that needs it? How many of you? Very good. And how many of you, this is pretty much your first experience. Maybe you've heard and read about cannabis and what it can do, but you're not really informed yet about the medical benefits. How many of those are here? Okay, for those of you who haven't had information, there's only a few, these are the people that you want to hear from. To those of you who've been involved in it, you're going to see the state of the art, where we are right now. As many of you know, the United States government has known since at least 1999, when they submitted their patent application, that medical cannabis could be used for a number of different conditions, including Alzheimer's disease, and that it had properties that could benefit lots of other medical conditions. They've known that, and even though the Department of Health obtained that patent, they've not yet completely legalized this medicine, so it's available for all of us. So as a baseline, consider that. Let me get started, first of all, with the introductions for our panel. On our far our far left to me, your right, is Joel White. Joel White joined the New Mexico Medical Cannabis Program in 2010 and the New Mexico Medical Cannabis Patients Alliance in 2011 to advocate for the treatment. And as far as I know, you've been active as a businessman in this community, correct?
Yes, I am.
Joel is a successful businessman who's been in business in Albuquerque. He was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1989. Prior to 2009, he never used cannabis, alcohol, or any illicit drug. In 2008, a friend suggested that he try cannabis and gave him some. He was reluctant due to his past history, but he did some research on his own and found that this medicine was very successful in treating his symptoms, and he was able to get off of other drugs that had significant side effects. So thank you for being here, Joel. Joel says, why cannabis? I began advocating for this medical treatment strategy because there were no business professionals at the time willing to advocate publicly for this very safe and effective treatment. That's Joel White. Please welcome. Dr. Darryl Hudson, seated next to Joel, says, why cannabis? Basically, why cannabis is important. First, because he recognized the medical value of the plant at a young age, having family members who were ill, and found relief through cannabis. His father and brothers have MS. Obviously, this concerned him and helped push him into the study of genetics. Second, as a molecular biologist, the plant is extremely interesting as a source of fiber, food, fuel, and medicine. And currently, he sees the results and is intrigued by how different varieties of strains have different effects. He works to understand how combinations of cannabinoids and other molecules, such as terpenes, provide medical benefits for various ailments. Dr. Hudson has a PhD in molecular biology. He's the president of DOC Solutions, specializing in commercial cannabis production. Darryl's held a seat on many panels for the High Times Cannabis Cups. He's been the chief research officer and quality assurance manager for other companies. He basically is an expert who's known worldwide, and it's such a pleasure to have Darryl with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Seated next to Darryl is Emily Kaltenbach, and she's the state director for DPA's New Mexico office. She joins the organization following 15 years working in New Mexico, implementing rural community-based health centers, helping reform the long-term care system, and most recently setting the stage to implement federal health care reform in the state. Prior to joining DPA, she served as the Director of Policy and Planning at the New Mexico Aging and Long-Term Services Department and served as the Acting Director for New Mexico's Office of Healthcare Reform. Born and raised in rural New Mexico, Kaltenbach graduated from Beloit College with a BA in sociology and a minor. Did I get the name of Beloit?
You did.
Okay,
yeah.
good. You know, and a minor in healthcare studies. She later completed a master's degree in health administration at the University of Washington School of Public Health before returning to New Mexico. When asked why cannabis, Emily says, quote, "The prohibition of marijuana is an utter failure. The United States wastes billions of dollars enforcing marijuana laws, even for low-level offenses, incarcerating and penalizing marijuana users, and denying seriously ill patients access to beneficial treatment. Prohibitionist laws have led to the unprecedented levels of violence and corruption, while marijuana remains a widely consumed and almost universally available to young people. Even as public opinion has shifted in favor of marijuana law reform, arrests for marijuana possession have swollen over the last decade, with disproportionate targeting of blacks and Latinos at the heart of that enforcement surge." Emily Kaltenbach. Seated next to her is Bryan Krumm, Master of Science in Nursing, RN, a lot of acronyms here that I didn't go ahead and define, but he has a lot of degrees. He essentially is a psychiatric nurse practitioner at Sage Neuroscience Center in Albuquerque, providing comprehensive evidence-based psychiatric care to patients with a variety of disorders. He is also the director of New Mexicans for Compassionate Use and Bishop of Medicine for the Zen Zion Coptic Orthodox Church. He helped author New Mexico's medical cannabis law, and he's one of the leading referral sources to New Mexico's medical cannabis program. He maintains close to 1,000 patients in the program, the majority of which have been referred to for the program for PTSD. Bryan says, why cannabis? Cannabis is not only the best medication available for treating PTSD, it is the only medication that is effective for treating PTSD. Think about that. Cannabis is far safer than any available pharmaceutical. Cannabis is the only medication that addresses the underlying neurobiological processes involved in PTSD. Ladies and gentlemen, Bryan Krumm. Seated next to Bryan is Nurse Heathe Manus, and Nurse Heather has been a practicing registered nurse who started her career here in the state of New Mexico. She's a local girl with ties to Farmington, New Mexico. I know a lot about Nurse Heather, and I'll try to keep it short, but she is an amazing person. She is the first certified cannabis nurse in the United States. She has spoken throughout the United States in front of a variety of groups on medical and policy issues relating to cannabis. She's been in New Mexicans' homes and helped them get off the dangerous pharmaceuticals they were on and resume a normal life with the aid and the benefit of medical cannabis. She is a passionate advocate for her cause. She formed the Arizona Cannabis Nurses Association, of which she is president, and she took on the state of Arizona and brought it to its knees. After the state had denied it 20 petitions to add new conditions, she brought one on behalf of our veterans primarily, but lots of other folks, including women who are the majority of PTSD patients. And after the department denied adding PTSD, she took them to appeal, took them to 4.5 days of evidentiary hearings, and at the end, they lost. And she proved to preponderance of the evidence that the state of Arizona exercised poor discretion and ordered the state to add PTSD. This is the first time this has ever happened in the United States. Nurse Heather says, as a nurse, I have seen firsthand the astounding benefits experienced by patients. I'm convinced that cannabis is a gentle plant medicine provided by nature to help increase health and well-being. Nurse Heather. Our last panelist is also the sponsor and host of this amazing event that is being put on tonight. Zeke Shortes, who I've known now for 3 years, is the executive director and co-founder of Sacred Garden, a licensed medical cannabis producer in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Zeke has spent the last 20 years developing expertise in new product development, creating controls to monitor and ensure inventory protocols, and building a leading cannabis cultivation and dispensary right here in your hometown, Santa Fe. Zeke says, why cannabis? Because it is natural, safe, no related deaths, no reported deaths in the history of the medicine. It's medicine that can help without the specific disease of 40 or 50 that we know of, and countless more that will be discovered soon. I've gotten to know Zeke over the past 3 years. He attends a lot of the major conferences. In a smaller state like New Mexico with a smaller population, he stands out as one of the finest dispensaries in the United States, and he's right here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and our sponsor. So having taken some time to let you know about who our panelists are, I want to call on them, each of them, to give you sort of a 5-minute, more or less an overview of what they're currently working on and some of the topics that they'll be talking about tonight. And we'll again start from our last but not least, first but not Joel. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, I came into this program, 2010 when I officially started. Prior to that, I really had no experience with any kind of mind-altering drug whatsoever. My first experience with wine was when I was 40 years old. That's the perspective that I came at this with. It took me, I didn't want anything to do with it, but in 2008, I was having a particularly bad exacerbation period due to my multiple sclerosis, and I decided, I was approached by a friend and he said, try taking cannabis. This is something that really works. The state has now legalized it. The program hadn't been fully implemented yet, so there's really no way to get a hold of it. He gave me some. I freaked out. I hid it in the back of my closet behind some clothes. Didn't want anything to do with it. But that started my process of investigation. I spent about a year learning about cannabis. What is this? How does it affect the body? What are the side effects? What are the consequences? And what I discovered was that everything that I had been told through my childhood and my adolescence and young adulthood was pretty much untrue. And so I came to the point where I was very much aware that cannabis was a potential treatment for my disease. However, I wasn't willing to take the step quite yet because I was very apprehensive. My whole life, it was something I wasn't going to do. When I had another particularly bad exacerbation in 2009, I paused for a moment and basically had a what the hell, I'm going to try this because this really sucks. And I worked up the courage, I tried it, and I was amazed. It was surprising to me. I tried to work through all of the, the effects and the experience that I was having, and it was very beneficial to me. And then I got to a point where, well, if this works for me, it's got to work for thousands of other people, and people need to know this. And I decided that if I'm going to join the program and I'm going to use this type of medical treatment for myself, I need to advocate so that other people can have access to it. And so beginning in 2010 and really more aggressively in 2011 and on, I've spoken on radio shows, television shows. I've spoken every year since 2011 at the legislature. I specifically like to talk to the people in the legislature, even in the House or the Senate, that are specifically resistant to cannabis or trying to block or present additional hurdles to access for other patients. And I just talked to them. I said, look, I'm a cannabis patient. This is a cannabis patient talking to you. And I don't usually go as far as to say, I'm more articulate than you are, and you should be aware of this. But sometimes it'll come out. I'll infer. But anyway, it's been important for me to get out in front of people, to let people know that people like me are legitimate patients, and we should have access to this kind of beneficial medicine. I don't know what else to say, but this was an amazing experience for me to find this, and it's been great. The last medicine that I was given by a medical provider, my personal medical provider and neurologist, to treat my symptoms was a drug called temazepam. And temazepam is a benzodiazepine drug. It's basically Valium light in the dosages that I was using, and it would help me sleep because I had a really hard time with that because I was so uncomfortable all the time. The last time I filled my prescription for temazepam was April of 2010, and I still have about 70 pills right now in my medicine cabinet. And the irony is, I can take 70 pills in my bag on a plane, and that would probably be enough to kill maybe 3 people or so, but I can't take cannabis, and I don't, so, on a plane. And I'm trying to advocate so that that is a possibility for patients that are struggling with disease like I've got or other more serious diseases, that they can access their medicine when they travel, because it's really important to me, and it's important to millions of other people around the country.
Hi, thanks for coming, everybody. I, again, was exposed to MS at an early age, having my father have MS, and then his brothers all were diagnosed with MS as well. So, firsthand seeing the benefits of medical cannabis, it was very intriguing as a scientist to start to look into that area. Only recently have I really made the official transition into the cannabis sphere. But I took a lot of educational steps going through neuroscience and studying pharmaceuticals and plant biology and molecular biology to be able to, really understand this plant. And from a scientific perspective, it really is amazingly interesting. And I feel not only excited about the potential that now that the laws are changing and a lot of, big money is starting to come in, we're going to be able to do a lot more research. But also an obligation to provide the data to show that it does work for certain illnesses. And obviously it doesn't work for everyone, and it doesn't work for every illness. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for cold weather. It actually lowers your blood pressure, which isn't good today. But, we do see numerous benefits across the board, multiple diseases, and when we start to look at the different cannabinoids in the plant and how the different varieties of plants that we're now breeding are producing different levels of those cannabinoids, we're starting to hone in on what exact ratios and metabolites within the plant are working against specific illnesses, whether it's sleep or MS for spasms, neuroprotection for Alzheimer's. There's many, the list goes on and on. And really, I just kind of want to leave it at that and hear from you guys and be able to try and answer your questions. So thank you for having us.
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for the invitation to sit on this esteemed panel. Some of the folks who I know and have worked side by side to advocate for saner health policies, primarily marijuana reform, cannabis reform here in New Mexico. I joined a group called Drug Policy Alliance about 4 years ago, and we are a national organization but have had a very strong presence in New Mexico for now almost 15 years. And it was really because of then Governor Gary Johnson, who was one of the first of our elected officials to be brave enough to really be public about his wish to change how we view marijuana in this state and nationally. And so that's why we started an office here in New Mexico. 2007 is when the Lynn and Aaron Compassionate Use Act was passed here in New Mexico, and we worked very hard, along with Bryan and others, to help craft some regulations and, well, also the law, but then regulations. New Mexico was the first state in the country to actually have a state-regulated system. And so many of the other states have followed suit and really looked to New Mexico as being a model. What we're hoping to do, though, is many states have surpassed us in adding qualifying conditions, and that's something that we continue to advocate for on behalf of New Mexico patients. But, you know, I also come to this issue from a personal perspective, growing up in rural New Mexico, about 40 miles south of Santa Fe. Many of you probably know the community that I grew up in, past Madrid, down a 3-mile dirt road. And, you know, I grew up in a house where cannabis was used responsibly. And I was taught from a young age that it was, you know, something that we didn't need to be ashamed of and could be used responsibly. But unfortunately, I couldn't talk about it. That, you know, my father used cannabis when I went to public school. And so, you know, as I grew up, I suddenly realized the tensions around sort of our failed drug policies in our country. And I also witnessed some of my neighbors who were sadly incarcerated for possessing small amounts of marijuana for personal use. I saw families being torn apart. And so I come to this issue from a public health perspective. It's about social justice, and it's about compassion and health. And so I'm working very proudly in this state to try to change our state's drug laws and try to reform our system for patients, but also for people who do use marijuana personally and responsibly. And so I'm happy to share about what we're doing at a state level here in New Mexico from a policy perspective. We're in the midst of the legislative session. I was worried I wasn't going to be here because I thought I'd have to be in committee, but I'm happy to be here instead of there. And we're working on a couple pieces of legislation that includes taxing and regulating marijuana for personal use, includes reducing penalties for personal use so that it's just a civil infraction, not a crime. You don't go to jail for possessing small amounts of marijuana. And also, there's been some really exciting legislation introduced about creating a research fund so that we can actually move forward for our patients. We can get the data, as Dr. Darryl had mentioned, to actually prove that cannabis works and is an important part of the healthcare spectrum. So we really need your voices there. That's what's most powerful in changing policy, is that people show up. And so again, I'd be happy to share specifics as the evening goes on about when these bills are going to be heard in committees and how you can get involved. And it's important for our elected officials to know that they're voting with their constituents, that we as the public are farther beyond them, and they need to feel safe in voting with their people on these really important issues. So thank you for inviting me to be here. Thanks.
Kind of a funny thing happened to me on the way up here today. I used to live up in the East Mountains, and I looked up on my way here and noticed it looked like it was snowing, so I took the back road coming up North 14 to get up to Santa Fe from Albuquerque. As I was getting onto North 14 at Tierras, there was some guy on the side of the road, kind of looked like a crazy old guy with long hair and a beard and carrying an empty gas can, trying to wave down somebody for a ride. So I decided, and God, crazy old guy with a beard could just as easily be me on the side of the road, and I better pick him up. Turns out this empty gas can, that's just something that he carries with him, because he's figured out that if he has an empty gas can with him and he's trying to hitchhike, it's more likely somebody's going to pick him up. You know what? It worked. That's the way it is with cannabis. Cannabis works. We might not have the big scientific studies to show that cannabis works, but you know what? He doesn't have a scientific study showing that an empty gas can is going to get him a ride. So we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of patients in medical cannabis programs throughout the United States. They know that this works. And the moral of the story is, like, if something works, it's hard to argue with results. And this does not belong in Schedule I. We're working on ways to try to get it out of there, and we're going to keep working in that direction. And I would like to thank you all for allowing me to be here this afternoon, or this evening.
Oh boy. After that intro, I don't know what else to say. Just so you know that we did take on Arizona, and we did kick their behind, but it was really Ken Sobel. He's an attorney, and he was the attorney for the Arizona Cannabis Nurses Association, and he worked pure magic in that courtroom. I've never seen anything quite like it. So he's really the one to thank for all of that work that we did there. Oh, cannabis. I was a home health nurse in New Mexico, or in Farmington, New Mexico, just taking care of my patients, and I started realizing, oh my goodness, all these patients are using cannabis, and it looks like dirt weed sitting on their tables, and I come in as a nurse, and I'm filling pill packs, and I know that they're using cannabis, and I thought, you know what, the Department of Health Services actually has a program for cannabis. Maybe I should look at that application or something and give that to these patients, because they're really sick. They really don't need these legal issues, and maybe they can get some better medicine. You know, that was kind of going through my head. So I went on to the website, and I pulled off a bunch of copies of the application. I went to my patients who had disclosed to me that they were using cannabis, and I just started getting them on the program because they were doing it anyway. What we found was that they really did need help getting the high quality medicine, and that's when I found Zeke, and he was able to help these patients get the medicine that they needed, and it was incredible, the results that we saw. Many of my patients were able to reduce their opiate use, because in the home health setting, there's a lot of pain. And so opiate medications are part of the game, and a lot of people were tired of being on them. And so we were able to use cannabis successfully to help reduce the opiate use. And with every patient I worked with, we got at least half of the medication reduced. And many of the patients got off of it completely, and then I was able to just discharge them from home health. It was amazing how much better they got when they weren't bogged down with pharmaceuticals, and they were now using a healthy medicine, cannabis. So that's sort of how this started. In addition to that, the home health patients that I was working with, many of them were on oxygen, or they had lung issue. You know, I thought, as a nurse, smoking's not a good idea. So I started making brownies for the patients, and that was a really good thing, because the edible gig worked out to, before long, I was making edibles for a third of the dispensaries in New Mexico. I was picked up by Ken Sobel over here to come help him set up an edibles kitchen in Arizona, and so we did that, and patients are getting access to so many different ways to take the medicine, from topical use to edible use. And so I'm really thrilled to see patients receiving the medicine that they need. At this point, I'm an educator. I don't make products. I work with Zeke, and I try to help educate the dispensary so that they can help educate the population, the patients. I'm trying to educate nurses and medical professionals. I speak with Bryan, well, we will be speaking at Patients Out of Time in May. we're doing a core curriculum for cannabis nursing. It's a basic certification course for nurses to come in and learn about cannabis. We're also doing an advanced course for nurses that have already received this core knowledge. We're now trying to advance that knowledge for them. So that's my role right now, is pretty much an educator, and I speak at lots of events, and I'm really thrilled to be here today. Thank you so much for coming out on a snowy night.
I'm Zeke Shortes. My wife Kelly and I started Sacred Garden. I put in an application about 5 or 6 years ago, and I didn't tell her I put in the application at first, because I was supposed to get a real job. But I tell you, this is way better than a real job. It has been a lot of hard work. We've been licensed almost 5 years now. We've had to deal with state agencies. We had to deal with me learning to be a business person, which I was adamant against taking any business classes in college, which turned out to be really stupid, because I just thought the business of, making money or learning how to make money is not what I wanted to do. Well, it turns out it's how you keep from losing your business. So it's actually a good idea. But anyway, we've kind of bumbled through it. We've done our best, learned new grow techniques, put every single bit of money that we would have earned back into the company to keep doing, better lights, creating better medicine. It's something that's very important to me and to the Sacred Garden staff. I talk to patients every day that it amazes me that it works so well for so many different kinds of ailments. I grew up in Texas, and it was just recreational, and it was bad. You were lazy, you were stupid, and it took forever to hunt down any weed. It was terrible. It would take like weeks when you wanted it the next day. And so I just really, I had a focus to, and a draw to bring good medicine to people that need it. And actually, even for recreational, I'm a big believer that it should just be legalized. This is a bunch of nonsense, throwing people in prison for small amounts of marijuana, or they've thrown medical patients in jail for small amounts of marijuana, and it's time to get the truth out. Let's get some studies on this, see where it can help us, other than what we know anecdotally and from some study that's been done in other countries like Israel and Brazil and Spain. So anyway, I am so thankful that all these amazing people showed up and that Ken agreed to moderate. He's got the best radio voice ever. Hopefully he'll use it sometime soon. But anyway, thank you. I look forward to us getting questions from you guys, and hopefully informing us all a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeke. And I must say, to all of you that, the issue of conflict of interest comes up when, if it's a commercial enterprise and they're presenting information or education, but that's not really true in the medical cannabis field. Number one, these are nonprofits. All the producers in New Mexico are nonprofits, as they are in Arizona. And number two is that because New Mexico, like some other states at least, allows for personal grows, many of these producers, including Zeke and many others, are all too willing to share with you information on how to grow your own. Stop by the dispensary sometime if you have some questions. They're more than happy to help teach you or give you information that's helpful to you if you need to grow your own medicine, the same as if you want to select some of the material, the product that they've grown. So there's really no conflict of interest. I do want to start off with a question to Bryan first, and then we'll pass it along. Bryan did an amazing presentation in Denver at a medical conference on cannabis, and he covered a lot of different conditions that he's been either involved with directly with his patients or has done research on. And it was a breathtaking view of the promise that cannabis has for some of these conditions. So, Bryan, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, the problem that we have right now in psychiatry is we're using the same techniques that we've been trying to use since the 1950s. If you look at modern psychopharmacology, it goes back to the 1950s, and we had researchers who were playing around with an antihistamine, and they tweaked it a little bit, and boom, we ended up with Thorazine based on an antihistamine backbone. Suddenly we had an antipsychotic medication. It was great at helping with agitation. Instead of having to just dope somebody up on opioids or barbiturates, now we had an alternative to that. They took the Thorazine, decided let's play around with this molecule, see what we can do, and they tweaked it a little bit more, and boom, we had the tricyclic antidepressant medication. So now we had a way to treat depression and anxiety. In the 1950s, we also ended up with the advent of lithium carbonate, so we had a way to stabilize mood. We developed the benzodiazepines, so we had a way to address anxiety. It was the heyday of psychiatric medication, but we've kind of stayed mired in those same techniques ever since. Even though we've had some changes in the structure of these molecules that makes them a little more tolerable, we have fewer side effects, we don't see any benefit in terms of clinical outcomes with the new psychiatric medications than we had with these ones that go back to the 1950s. The problem with these medications is that they don't address the underlying the cause of psychiatric disorders. We have found through new neuroimaging techniques that psychiatric conditions are almost uniformly related to dysfunction of endocannabinoid signaling. And to understand what endocannabinoid signaling is, we have a very complex system of receptors in our body that is responsible for regulating virtually every system in our body. This is a system of receptors that we discovered back in the 1980s. We discovered that we make our own substances like the ones found in marijuana. They're called endocannabinoids. They react with this system. This system regulates virtually everything, and dysfunction of this system has been identified in being related to a number of different types of disorders, things ranging anywhere from cancers to autoimmune diseases to psychiatric issues. So using an antidepressant medication to try to treat something that's related to a dysfunction of endocannabinoid signaling is not the best way to try to do that, or using an antipsychotic medication to try to stabilize mood isn't maybe the best way to try to do this. We want to address the underlying neurobiological processes that are involved in the causation of these psychiatric disorders, and that's where cannabis comes into play. Because dysfunction of endocannabinoid signaling is involved in almost every psychiatric disorder out there. Addressing these symptoms directly is the best way to do that. We can do that through the use of cannabis to help augment endocannabinoid signaling. We can also do that through things like proper diet and nutrition. We can do that with supplementation with things like omega fatty acids, especially EPA, DHA, those particular omega-3s really help to support endocannabinoid function. We can do that through something like a vitamin E supplement which helps to support the regulation of receptors in our body for cannabinoids. There are any number of ways that we can try to help support endocannabinoid function and provide better benefits in terms of psychiatric outcomes than we do with the current psychopharmacological medications that we're using. I see that every day in my own clinical practice. I've been working in psychiatric medicine for probably 18, 19 years now. I've actually been prescribing psychiatric medications for over 7 years now, and referring patients into the medical cannabis program since the medical cannabis program was put into effect. And cannabis is by far the safest and most effective medication for treating these psychiatric disorders.
Thank you. So basically, the way the federal government has approached it is it's okay to do as many studies as you want to do, and we'll find lots of money to fund those studies as long as the conclusion you come to is that cannabis is bad. And that's an actual reality. And it's a bottleneck in terms of research, and that's why we've fought for years to get studies funded and can't get them funded until one of the recent ones in Arizona that you may have already heard about on PTSD. And I'm here to tell you that we proved in a court of law with the finest lawyers that the Department of Health Services could hire in Arizona for thousands of dollars an hour, presenting as much evidence as they could put in. At the end of the day, they could not produce a single study that showed that cannabis did not work for PTSD, that it was not safe and effective, or that anyone had ever died in 5,000 years of our knowledge of the plant. This is a really important point. How many of you knew before Bryan just mentioned it about this endocannabinoid system? How many raise your hand? Okay, so a good portion of you do know it. I want to flesh that out a little bit. This is so fundamentally important to the nexus of where we are almost as a society and where we are as a plant, to know and understand the endocannabinoid system. Nurse Heather, maybe you could flesh that out a little bit more.
Oh, Bryan did a great job.
Oh, he did a great job.
He
I just
did a
want
great
you to
job.
flesh it out, too.
I like to bring it down a little bit simpler, though, and I use the small words. I work with patients that can't understand big words sometimes. Really what we're looking at is that the endocannabinoid system is the homeostasis or the balance system between all the other systems in our body. So it's not just for the mental and the psychiatric issues, it's for everything. And when you get imbalance with the endocannabinoid system, you find dis-ease and imbalance throughout the other systems in your body. And so what we do when we use the cannabis is like Bryan was saying, there is such a thing as an endocannabinoid deficiency. That means that your body's not producing the endocannabinoids that you need. So you take the exogenous form, or the cannabis plant, and it works and it helps you. There are a few different receptors that are involved with the endocannabinoid system. There's the CB1 receptor that's mainly found in the brain, the spinal cord, the organs, some of the organs, and the CB2 receptor is mainly found in the organs, and specifically it's right underneath the skin. Ironically enough, we have an abundance of CB2 receptors, and our skin actually is the largest organ of our body. And so the topical ointments and the salves and the things that we can use topically that don't create psychoactivity necessarily, that just really when you put it on, it feels like a warm hug wherever you rubbed it on. That's the CB2 receptors that are being utilized, and they're not normally utilized when you smoke, because when you smoke, it goes to the lungs, it goes to the bloodstream, it goes to the brain, and you're affecting the CB1 receptors. But utilizing the CB2 receptors are really important, and you do that when you eat the medicine or when you use it topically. So understanding the cannabinoid system is important when you're choosing the medicines that you want. Do you want the psychoactivity? Do you not want psychoactivity? Do you want a little psychoactivity but a lot of pain relief? And there's ways that you can work with the products when you understand how the system itself is working.
Great. And Darryl, maybe we can turn to you next to kind of flesh out, from the microbiologist.
Well, I mean, more from an educational perspective, it's very interesting how this system is so fundamental to so many things. As we said, sleep, appetite, depression, anxiety, you name it, and there seems to be some sort of endocannabinoid signaling involved. And the number of medical schools that teach doctors about this, is, I believe, less than 5% in the United States. And I'm not saying knocking doctors at all, but it's kind of unfortunate that even within the political system, the doctors have kind of been given this gatekeeper role where they're deciding whether or not cannabis is a medicine for you, and they don't even understand how it's affecting your body. And we need to, educate the doctors as well as the public, and that's a two-way street. You people as well can ask your doctor if he knows about the endocannabinoid system, because it's a travesty that it's not taught significantly and used as one of the most fundamental targets of treatment before treating, not treating the actual ailment, but treating the symptoms of those ailments. So I think, from an educational perspective, we're happy to share that information with you. But the information's out there, it's available. There's hundreds of published studies on, cell culture, mice, rats. Yeah, unfortunately, we haven't been able to do a lot of the human trials, but we do understand a significant amount about the endocannabinoid system and how it's functioning now. And as we look at the plant, we start to find molecules in the plant that aren't just cannabinoids, terpenes, for instance, and terpenes that are not just found in cannabis are also found in other plants, are showing efficacy on the CB2 receptor specifically. And we've known about a number of these plants for years. Echinacea, for instance, also seems to have CB2 receptors in it. So it's just interesting that we're finally starting to find out why some of these medical plants were working, and they all seem to be working on the endocannabinoid system.
Can we get a little more explanation about CB2 receptors?
Sure.
So we want to grab that one?
I mean, really, for the layman, a receptor is like a lock and key type mechanism, right? And so the CB2 receptor is expressed, as Heather said, a lot in the organs and the epithelials. Activation of that receptor seems to have anti-inflammation properties. It also seems to be associated with specific neurons and have neuroprotective properties. A number of people, as we said, that don't want to get high by activating only the CB2 rather than the CB1 receptor are still seeing a lot of the medical benefits without getting the psychoactivity. And depending on how these extracts are made, whether they're cold temperature or high temperature, there's actually different forms of the cannabinoids in the plant that are acids or non-acids. And the heat activation is really what makes a lot of that psychoactive. So by non-heat activating even the plant material and creating edibles and tinctures and salves and under the tongue glucosal sprays, and the list goes on and on, we're seeing that we can actually target this system and treat it without any of the psychoactivity.
We've also, with CB2 receptors, they're largely expressed in the immune system, so any type of autoimmune disorder, you want to take a look at potentially targeting CB2 receptor activity.
And what we've seen as we presented the case on PTSD was specifically some of the returning vets were showing a particular sort of a nuanced level of PTSD, and that they were essentially dehydrated because of the PTSD condition. For them, they were not producing internally the cannabinoids that they needed. So it was analogous to somebody who's desperate for water and dehydrated, needing a drink of water. And that's why, in terms of carrying on our crusade on behalf of veterans, although obviously there's so many victims of people who suffer from it, principally women, but at least for them, the thought of sending them overseas to expose them to conditions that cause a debilitating condition that's lifelong because there is no cure, and then to essentially potentially treat them like criminals in a state that doesn't allow PTSD as a condition for cannabis is just not right. So all of us probably, or a good majority of the audience has probably seen American Sniper. And we're reminded constantly of events, shootings at Fort Hood, and other things that have occurred that are examples, really, of people, vets who've returned home and who've not gotten the care that they need and deserve, and events occur that basically cause yet further violence. I wanted to go ahead and turn for a minute to what's available in terms of the kinds of products at Sacred Garden and other dispensaries to be able to provide different methods of treating these conditions.
That's one thing Sacred Garden, all of our employees have worked very hard at, is providing a lot of delivery methods. So most of the U.S. grew up with the only option being the flower or the buds that you smoke. Now you can vaporize it, so you can avoid some of the carcinogens taking into your lungs. We've got canna capsules, and we've got high CBD, low THC capsules as well. So, really good for sleep, anti-inflammatory. We have oral sprays. We have lots of different edible options. And we're always looking for something new or beneficial. We're checking the market across the U.S. to see if there's other things that people are really latching on to or that are important for their healthcare protocol. I think that's
so. And you're welcome to stop by anytime to find out what these products are. whether you have a card or not, they can give you information, about cannabis and the cannabis therapies they have. If you have one, they can at least give you the information so that you're knowledgeable about it. I wanted to get some policy out there, so I want to turn to Emily. Can you kind of give our audience a bit of information? Obviously, some things have happened recently in New Mexico, some regulatory changes and some new laws that are pending, and give us your perspective from the Drug Policy Alliance on those.
Sure. So, yeah, exciting. A couple days ago, the Department of Health announced that they had finalized their rule changes. And this has been really a year-long process, because the first version of those rules, as many of you know, were really terrible and really would have hurt patients. And we're so proud that patients showed up. I think it was the summer hearing when 500 patients packed the auditorium, and there was a hearing officer who knew nothing about medical cannabis, who the Department of Health had to really help them decide what rules should stay and which ones should go. And I think she was so taken by the stories and the real life situations of the patients that most of those terrible rules were thrown out. So I think we ended up with a version that most people are really happy about. We still have a few concerns with them. The example would be that we were hoping they would change the rule that patients have to get recertified every year. That's a huge burden, as many of you know, especially our patients living in rural areas on low incomes who have to go see a medical provider to get those papers signed every year. At the very least, they could have waived that for folks that are terminally ill and folks that are on hospice or have other terminal illnesses. So, I think there's still some room for improvement in those rules. But, 4 years ago when I started Drug Policy Alliance, we were sure that this governor was going to dismantle this program. She actually ran on her campaign saying that she was going to take the program away from our patients. And we're encouraged that today the program is still present and it's strong, and that's because of all of you and all of the patients. So that's the power of all of your voices. So, but there's still a lot to be done. I think in the broader reform of cannabis, Drug Policy Alliance is advocating for sensible tax and regulate legislation in our state. That I am positive will not happen with this governor, but we are setting the stage for that to happen 4 years from now. And so it's really important that we get our legislators on board. And just last week, we had a hearing for a bill that would tax and regulate marijuana for personal use for adults 21 years and older that Senator Ortiz-Pino has introduced. And it is actually a resolution, so that means that it would bypass the governor's veto and go directly to the people for a vote. Unfortunately, our House of Representatives, I don't think we can get them to pass it, but again, we're setting the stage, so we're trying to get the Senate to pass that this year. And what was really interesting in those hearings was hearing from the legislators who have been probably the most adamantly opposed to marijuana reform say it's coming and we need to be ready for it. So I think people realize that this is around the corner for our state, and they want to make sure that it's sensible legislation. So again, I think the whole tenor of the conversation at the legislative level has completely changed, and so I think we're close. And then again, I mentioned reducing penalties for marijuana possession. That's a first step. I think that actually has the ability to pass the Senate this year. It passed the House in 2013. Again, I don't think we'll get it signed by the governor, but it's telling our elected officials that it's time to change the way we police marijuana laws in our state. So then, and the last piece of legislation that I really think is important, especially in the context of this conversation, that Senator Ortiz-Pino again and a Representative Debbie Armstrong, who's actually the mother of Aaron Armstrong, the bill was named after a young woman who suffered and still suffers from cancer, who was an incredible advocate at a very young age. She's now, her mother is now a representative, and we're really proud to have her serve because she's going to bring all of your voices to the legislature loud and clear. They've both introduced a bill that would create a research fund for New Mexico that would use some of the licensing fees that the Department of Health gets from our licensed producers and create a research fund so that we can and work with the University of New Mexico and actually have really good data and information. So that is actually going to be heard on Friday in a House committee. And so I urge all of you, if you can, to be there and stand up in support of this. And so I will, before the end of the evening, give you exactly the time and location. It'll be in the afternoon on Friday in, I think it's the Public and Regulatory Affairs Committee. And it's really important that we all show up and show our support.
Thank you, Emily. I had a couple concerns about some of the recent developments. The two that worry me the most is what seems to me an excessive amount that they seem to be charging producers to be entitled to grow 450 plants. So previously it was $30,000 for 150 plants, and under the current scheme it would be $90,000 for 450 plants. Obviously those costs have to be passed on to patients, and New Mexico being one of the poorest states, that seems unfair. And the second thing is, in contrast, Arizona allows an unlimited grow, and most of the new grows going in are 2,000 plants minimum, and they charge an annual renewal fee for those licenses at $5,000. The second part is the question of how long it takes for folks in New Mexico to get their patient cards. It seems that stories that I hear that it requires weeks for patients, and as you mentioned, folks who are in hospice or cancer, they're running out of time. Is there anything on the horizon as far as doing things about those two issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll continue to bring up issues. Our concerns are all rooted in the patient, and so if any of those rule changes are going to impact patient access to quality medicine, then that's where we'll get involved at a policy level to advocate. We didn't get involved in the producer fees structure. The Producer Association, I think, has been very vocal about that. But when it comes to passing on costs to the patients, that's where we'll raise a red flag about that. We have been very vocal when the department wanted to increase the cost to actually apply to be a patient, or actually charge to be a patient. That's ludicrous, and we continued to ask where was that money going, and the department needed to show that they actually needed funds that would benefit the program and not just be returned to the general fund, which appeared to have been happening for the last couple of years. So those are the types of issues that we will continue to be vocal about, to make sure that if the department is changing any of the rules, that it's in the best interest of the patients, and whether that's fees, whether that's qualifying conditions, whether that's getting access to your cards, because we know that sadly the bureaucracy can slow some of that stuff down, and when it's not a priority of the department, sometimes we see those lags, and so that's, as an organization, that's where we're going to be advocating.
I'd like to add a little bit from a patient perspective. Obviously, getting cards renewed in a timely manner has been a big problem. It's been a big issue for a lot of patients over the last 4 years that I've been involved anyway. But we have been trying to be much more vocal, much more in the face of the cannabis program to make sure that they understand that this really does have adverse effects on patients. And it's not really fair, but the more prominent we can be in dialogue with the cannabis program, it seems to increase efficacy within the program. This is my 5th renewal of my card. And the first one, I think I got my renewal card the day my previous card expired. The next time I got it a week before, and then it was about the same last year. Well, this year, I had already talked with him. They know who I am. I'm the vice president of the Medical Cannabis Patients Alliance. They know that, and they know that I'll raise a stink if I have a problem. And I got my card last week, and my card doesn't expire until March 4th. So, squeaky wheel.
Squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how many, so let's do a little question, a little test quiz here. How many folks out there think that the number of states that have medical cannabis programs, how many think that number is 20? Raise your hand. How many think that's 25? Raise your hand. How many think 23? C is correct. 23 states that have a medical program plus the District of Columbia.
How many have noticed that it's all the West except for the Mormons in Utah and the Texans next to them?
That's, the Mormons in Utah passed by almost a unanimous vote. I almost forget the Compassionate Use Act, Nurse Heather.
It would be the Charlotte's Web bill.
The Charlotte's Web. And that was going to be one of my other questions, because we had 11 states, in addition to the 23 states and the 1 District of Columbia that have the medical. We also now have been joined by 11 predominantly red states, including Utah, that allow for the compassionate use by juveniles or young people who suffer from epileptic or seizures. A little misleading, but that would bring our total at least to about 34, majority of the states. We also now have 4 adult legal states, Colorado, Washington, Alaska, and Oregon. All right, good job. I wanted to get back to some of the topic that, well, first of all, is there anything on the federal level, Emily, that you've been looking at? We know that at the end of the year, Congress has decided to defund the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, from being able to carry on enforcement activities that interfered with states that had legal medical programs. How many of our audience knew that? The end of the year, the DEA was defunded. One of the few things that the Congress could do in a bipartisan way was to actually defund the DEA so that they can't interfere with the state programs that are in existence that are legal. What else on the federal level is promising as good news?
So, well, there are a couple of pieces of legislation that are good news. One of the issues we're really concerned about, and it's been mentioned on the panel, is really about our veteran patients who don't have access to medical cannabis in their states because the VA is not allowed to certify them for the program. And so there is some legislation being introduced to allow the VA to do that. So that's encouraging. We have seen some legislation introduced to take cannabis off Schedule 1, which also is really important, as Bryan mentioned. Again, our research is completely, the hands are tied for researchers because of the classification of cannabis on the federal Schedule 1. So those are 2 pieces of legislation in Congress that we're watching closely. I do think there's been a huge shift, especially from the Department of Justice over the last year, in the way they are looking at drug policy reform generally. Holder has been surprisingly good, and now hopefully his predecessor will be as well, on not enforcing federal law when it comes to medical cannabis, to cannabis in general. So we're hoping that we'll see that continue through this administration. As you mentioned in the Omnibus bill, the inability to go after the defunding of DEA, which is such a corrupt agency, was something to celebrate. So we're hoping that we'll see more of that. But again, I think there are big questions about Holder's predecessor in the Department of Justice and what they may do. And again, sadly, we only have a few more years left in this administration. We don't know what the new administration will do in regards to drug policy reform. So it's so important that Congress passes these 2 pieces of legislation so that it allows more states to move forward comfortably in legalizing marijuana in their jurisdictions.
Excellent. Anybody else?
There's also a really important legal opinion pending in the next couple of weeks in California, with the U.S. District Court has actually allowed an evidentiary hearing on the Schedule I placement, the constitutionality of that. So hopefully with that,
Right.
we'll see in a couple of weeks that the judge will come out and say that it is unconstitutional to remain in Schedule I because of the accepted medical use in 23 states and the
Yes.
District of Columbia. And we'll see that probably go to the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court.
Right.
But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, in the meantime, as Bryan mentioned, there's a U.S. District Court in California, I believe it's north of Sacramento, and they have had a criminal prosecution underway, and part of the crimes that were charged against the individuals who were cultivators and distributors, part of the crime that was charged was that they were dealing in a Schedule I controlled substance. And so they offered up the defense that it was completely irrational for cannabis to be in Schedule I, and the judge allowed an evidentiary hearing on it, and all that evidence is now in, and closing arguments on the subject has occurred. And it looks promising, at least the questions that have been asked by the judge and others who've been watching this case pretty closely. What it would mean is that if she decides that it was basically irrational for cannabis to be a Schedule I drug, then she will set up what they call an estoppel, or prevention of the government from prosecuting them for crimes based upon Schedule I. And that'll at least set off a conversation, hopefully throughout the rest of the country, as to why. Because there's no sane person can conclude that there is no redeeming medical value, from cannabis. Even
Even the Surgeon General just admitted it.
Even the Surgeon General, so. I wanted to go back, Darryl, if you could, because I know we talked about a number of things, and it involves the genetics and the gene sequencing and some of those issues that this is kind of the new frontier. I think we would all agree, would all panelists agree that we already have enough knowledge to know that cannabis is safe and effective in providing at least a palliative benefit to make people feel better for lots of different medical conditions. And if we didn't have any more science than that, we would at least know that for sure. My question is, in the frontier, how do you see the development through the microbiology side of it in terms of where we're going with cannabis?
Really, again, the medical community as well as the political community, what they want is reliable, standardized medicine. And, largely that's going to come in the form of extracts, I think, for many patients, where we can actually take a large quantity of plant material and extract specifically different medical components of the plant in different ways and combine them in a very reliable way. I mean, again, one of the problems having the doctors, at least in Canada, the doctors, when they make a medical prescription, they have to give you grams per day, and they have no idea what to dose you with. And how could they when there's so many varieties and so much variation within those varieties? So that's been a major issue for a lot of groups like the Canadian Medical Association to come on board and say, yes, we're willing to allow our doctors to prescribe this, even though, like the Surgeon General, they listen to their patients. They know there's medical efficacy. So from a breeding perspective, it's really interesting that now we have genome sequences. We just submitted a paper showing about 150 genome sequences, and we have a lot more than that we're pumping through. And really what that provides us to do is do very tailored and specific breeding programs for those molecules. In the past, largely because of prohibition, the only thing that was really bred for was THC, to get people high, and yield, to get high yielding plants. And that was, primarily what people could see, what people could test. Now that we have the ability to go in with scientific instrumentation, gas chromatography, HPLC, and look at all the different molecules and relate those molecules to the genes involved in their production, we can start to produce strains such as Charlotte's Web and these other high CBD varieties that are coming out. Look at other molecules such as THCV, CBG, CBN, and yeah, we can get into all these later, but there's different properties associated with these molecules, especially in combination with some of the terpenes, antioxidants, flavonoids. I mean, at last count, there was about 538 biologically active molecules in the plant. So, I mean, the potential for recombining those in different ways and creating different medicines is almost, exponential, like infinite.
And also, just to add to that, when we put on the case on PTSD in Arizona, I tried to draw the distinction between plant extractions as opposed to, combining molecules like pharmaceutical companies do. They find the best attributes of plants, come up with a molecular design, and then try to recreate it by creating molecules, versus cannabis as a plant, and a plant extraction, and like so many other extractions, and how that is an extraction is actually safer than many of the other plant extractions that you get at your local grocery store. Can you sort of follow up on that?
Yeah, I mean, even if you go into your local mall, you'll probably find an essential oil store selling, what do they call it, aromatherapy and stuff like that. There's many medical molecules in those plants, and now with the extraction technologies that we have, we're able to purify those. And it's really no different than a pharmaceutical company would do to, express a protein inside of, say, a yeast or a cell culture, and then purify that out and create a drug. What we're finding, though, is obviously nature knew a little bit what was going on and how to interact with mammals and this endocannabinoid system. And so, there's no need to really tweak the actual structure of the molecules, and we know this because Meshulam did take THC and CBD and make different variations of them, and what we got were these synthetics like K2 and spice, which were released and having all these crazy negative side effects. So, I mean, we don't even need to do those trials to know that the molecules produced in the plant are much better than the synthetic variations that we're going to be able to create out of them. So it is really just about finding what works for you, because as we talked about the endocannabinoid system and difference in endocannabinoids in people, there's also difference in the endocannabinoid gene receptor expression, meaning the person next to you may have much different levels of expression, not only levels of creation of those endocannabinoids. So when they say marijuana affects everyone differently, that's probably likely true. And because the endocannabinoid system is such a balance and homeostasis, it really has a lot to do with your personality, how you're going to react to cannabis. So,
Thanks. Nurse Heather, would you like to comment on extractions and infusions, and Zeke, maybe following on that, how you approach that within your dispensary?
I talk a lot on panels and do different presentations on extractions, and basically I just talk about the plant and that what you're doing is extracting the essence of that plant, the spirit of the plant. And so when I'm talking to folks who are doing extractions and they're creating medicine products for patients, I talk about how important it is that you keep your spirit right, that you don't have loud, crazy music going on, or you don't have, hatefulness or fighting amongst others happening. We actually had a rule in Arizona that if you're having a bad day, you can't be in the kitchen. And so there were days when people weren't having a bad day, they had to go home. And it was okay. Nobody got in trouble. It wasn't one of those things. It just is. Because what we're doing is really extracting the essence of that plant. And when you're handling that spiritual part, you yourself need to be clean in what you're doing, because we are providing high quality medicine for patients. We're not just creating widgets. This is real medicine. And so I could go into lots of extraction techniques. I'm not going to do that, but I will say that one thing about Sacred Garden is that they do keep that spirit about them. And when they are creating products, they're doing it with you, the patients, in mind, and it makes a difference in the end result.
And Zeke, to add on to that, again, not to talk about any specific methodology or anything of that, but just generally, the extraction and some of the products that you infuse, and quality controls in that regard.
One thing that, I'm going to talk about testing a little bit, because that's a really big topic. They are requiring testing for the first time with the new rules and regulations, which is awesome. It is what the industry in New Mexico needs. Originally, the way the legislator had it set up, New Mexico State University was supposed to be doing all the testing, both for patients and for producers. And then because they received federal funding, they opted out, and that left no one to do any testing. A couple of testing labs have opened up and closed. And now we've got some really good testing that the state is requiring, but we don't really have a place to do it. Actually, we do not have a place in the state of New Mexico to do heavy metals testing except with New Mexico State University, who refuses to do it. So it's really important, and we need to get on board so that patients can be certain of what the cannabinoid profile is, as well as, you know, is it safe to smoke? Does it have mold? Does it have aspergillus? I mean, these are the things that we're talking about. Sick patients, and they shouldn't be smoking mold. They shouldn't be smoking these other things. They need lots of options, as many delivery options as possible to meet their need. We do a lot of custom capsules or custom design on protocols for people, especially cancer patients that are stage 3, stage 4, don't have a lot of time, and either don't want to do chemo and radiation, or want some relief and to be able to eat and not be so nauseous while they're taking those. Anyway, the quality of the medicine is really important. We're always looking at better ways to dry and harvest and cure. And I go to conferences and I talk to as many growers and people that know what they're doing, so we can get better and provide better quality medicine. You know, New Mexico is very naive in this program, and as such, you know, some producers are good and some are still struggling and learning, and some are so broke, you know, they're just trying to stay alive right now. So because we haven't had the ability to grow in the most efficient way that we can. Plant count needs to go out the window soon. I don't mean to go along my diatribe, but you know, it's time for us to get efficient and grow up and be professional and provide good quality medicine all across the state.
Hi, excuse me. My name is Jacob Vigil. I'm actually the architect of the medical cannabis research provision, that bill that
Speak
Lino
loud.
and I have been working on.
Speak loud so everybody hears you.
No, that's fine. I don't need to take up too much time.
No. So I basically introduced this bill because I think that the state is authorized, morally obligated to be funding medical research. So they're authorizing the use and also the restriction of this without a lot of research, right? So there's a bottleneck there. Excuse me, my voice is going out. But my question is really for all of you guys. Do we have a current source of funding? So I'm an associate professor in the psychology department at UNM. I'm doing pain research, sleep research, different types of cannabis research I'm now getting into. Now that I'm tenured, I feel I don't have the stigma anymore. But my question is really for all of you guys. What source of funding do I have? You know, obviously as scientists, we have an amazing job that we can study anything we want under the sun. But we're also tasked with the burden of funding all this personally. So I need to get money just to be able to work with patients, to be able to do the tests, to be able to do the experiments.
Yeah,
this and that.
I mean, the beauty is this is a semi-pharmaceutical industry, and when you actually look at a pharmaceutical model and some of these big corporations, these guys directly invest 20% of their profits directly back into research because they know it's not what they're selling today that's going to make them their profits in 5 or 7 years. And so, whereas, yes, you're entirely restricted getting any government funding. I mean, the amount of trials that we had to go through to get Sue Sisley's trial finally approved, to be honest, which is not going to happen because she's reliant on federal marijuana to get that, and her trial requires high CBD lines. And, you know, the coming out of Mississippi, they've said, well, maybe a year, maybe 2, who knows. So even though that trial's been funded and approved, it's not going to happen because of the hurdles and the handcuffs involved. That being said, now we're seeing, you know, billionaires start to invest in this space, not millionaires. And that, I think, is really your option, to team up with some of those guys and say, look, if you want to really prove that your product works, even Zeke, you know, not being a billionaire, but you want to prove it works, you need to take 15 to 20% of your budget and invest it back in R&D. And I applaud you for putting the bill in, but I really honestly think that that money should be coming from recreational. And when recreational goes, the price of recreational should be 30% more, and 15% of that should go directly to R&D and to support the medical patients.
So Zeke, how interested are growers in funding legitimate medical cannabis research here in New Mexico to help us pioneer this research? There's no reason why we should.
You know, I would say very. We want a lot more patients. We want a lot more people getting relief, and you know, with all the misconceptions and misinformation in the past 70 years, there's a lot of people that are afraid to even look at it as an option. You know, in terms of funding, you know, God, I would just love a month when I didn't have to worry about paying bills. So, you know, talk to me, let's have that conversation in 3 years, maybe, hopefully less.
So the question what came out of that, I mean, how many in here know about the bottleneck when it comes to research on cannabis? Show of hands, how many of you know about the federal bottleneck? Okay, there's quite a few people that don't. This came up in our trial, and I'm close friends with Sue Sicily, who they mentioned. Sue Sicily is a doctor and a former professor at the University of Arizona, and she was in Phoenix, and I've known her for several years. We work collaboratively to help her fund a study on PTSD. And the bottom line is that it is easier to research heroin, you name whatever the chemical is, but the hardest thing in this country to research is cannabis. And it requires multiple approvals from agencies that have complete discretion. They can take as long as they want, and they do. And bottom line was that hers was the first in 10 years that had been approved. And as Darryl pointed out, the only source that you can go to get the cannabis that will be used for the study is from University of Mississippi, or Mississippi State, or Mississippi. One of the hippies. It's one of those, you know, but really, there.
But you can get funding to study a gas can on hitchhiking.
Yeah, exactly. So that was
the reality is the Canadian program's only been up and running about 1.5 years, and almost every one of those companies that got a license, because it's a commercially sold product that's a medicine, you can go directly into phase 4 clinical trials without approval. And so these guys, rather than funding the research at the university, a lot of them are segregating a part of their building and bringing researchers right in. And whether they're doing that just to boost their stock for tomorrow or not, I have personal friends that have got, you know, $500,000 plus to support their research program for the next 2 or 3 years, and that was unheard of or impossible even 2 or 3 years ago.
But these are coming from private sources, though?
Private sources, absolutely.
And so I will say that, like the state of Colorado, now that they have an adult recreational program, you know, set aside, it was $12 million or something in that vicinity, and actually did $2 million of that was awarded to Dr. Sicily for her study, even though most of her work had been done in Arizona. So yeah, the difficulty is, and of course, I had to rely on all of these published studies, hundreds of them, as we prepared for this trial. And of course, every study concludes with, we need more study, you know, so in a sense, it's the research industrial complex as well. But there are private sources. Probably best thing to do is to find out where some of these major conferences are occurring, and to come to the conference and to seek out, you know, other businesses that at this point are interested and can afford to do more research. But good question. We have other questions. We were going to do this by, is it okay if we do this by handing them a mic and letting them just ask their question?
Sure.
Is that okay with you guys? Okay. And then, yes, thank you. This young lady right here, because I think I saw her hand first.
Hi. I am quite convinced, and I think most of us here are, of the palliative aspects of cannabis, and I'm extremely curious about the curative aspects. And if anyone has any information or experience with the curative aspects of cannabis, I'd like to know.
Okay, does anyone want to take that on from the panel? And I might have an observation too, so.
I actually can, in terms of curative, in terms of cancer, there is a lot of research showing that cannabinoids have anti-tumoral effects. Multiple reasons for that. One is that they are able to induce what's called apoptosis. That's that normal programmed cell death. And cancer tumors grow because they aren't undergoing that normal death of the cells. They just keep growing and growing and growing. These growing tumors have to feed themselves, so they induce something called angiogenesis, and that's commandeering blood vessels so they can feed themselves. Cannabis helps prevent that process of them actually grabbing the other blood vessels so they can feed themselves. Another thing that cannabinoids do is that they help to prevent what's called metastasis, and that's the spread of cancer to other parts of the body. A friend of mine gave me a set of CT scans from a woman who had come to him to get a large supply of cannabis so that she could follow the Rick Simpson protocol for treating her lung cancer. On the first scan on the CT, this was January of 2012, there was a huge mass in the lung field. She was diagnosed with an advanced lung cancer. She had tried one round of chemotherapy and she was not able to tolerate that. She decided, and she was told she was probably going to die anyway, so she followed the Rick Simpson protocol, which involves using very large doses of cannabis extract. 2 months later, a follow-up CT showed perfectly clear lung fields. The cancer was completely gone. I spoke to her about 6 months ago on the phone. She's still cancer-free today. This was March of 2. Rick Simpson recommends a gram a day of oil. Yeah. And the only way really to kind of get those types of doses is rectally, as a suppository. I'm not sure if any of the producers in New Mexico are making suppositories at this point.
Sacred Garden does.
Yeah, Sacred Garden is making, we do a lot of custom medicines for people, so suppositories was one thing that a couple of patients had come to us and said was a necessity for taking the medicine. So I will say too, we've had numerous patients and I've heard horror stories about talking about cancer and cannabis curing cancer. And there's actually a lot of gag orders around it. So I can just talk anecdotally. We had someone come in with lung cancer, inoperable lung cancer, and they were told they were going to die in 6 months, and that was probably, they do the hash oil therapy. They continue to do it even after bringing the lung cancer into remission because they want to be safe and make sure they're staying on top of it. And this guy's still alive. It's like a year and a half later. The doctors are actually doing, or his doctor wants to do a study on him because he's just blown away by the results. And obviously it was something he was never, it was never presented as an option in medical school. So he's really dumbfounded and wants to share the information.
I'll give you my little anecdotal. I did not have cancer. I have relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. Before I started in the program, I could walk about 2 miles. Could walk about 2 miles before I would really start dragging my legs and having trouble with balance and just any kind of general stamina. I've been in the program since March of 2010. This morning I did 71 push-ups, then I did 50 squat presses, military presses, without holding on to a table or balancing, just standing in the room. I go on bike rides with my wife. We go 10 to 40 miles on bike rides. That's stuff that I couldn't do before I got into the program. It's anecdotal, but it works.
And I might add, in terms of the Virginia Commonwealth study that was done in 2006, I think it was, that showed that they believe that cannabis was most effective for lung cancer, breast cancer, and skin cancer. Nurse Heather has a story that she tells about a gentleman who had skin cancer and was being readied for surgery.
I could tell it.
And then you tell the story because because you tell
I
it
could
so
tell
much
it.
better.
I'll tell the story. Yeah, so basically very similar to your story, Joel. Someone who has never used cannabis, never drank, never smoked, is Mormon, and he had skin cancer. And he'd gone to the doctor, and he was doing the dermatologist, and they were cutting him off, and things were going fine. Yes, absolutely. And he had gone in for a surgery. They were going to take off a skin cancer on the side of his face. The doctor, they did it in the office, and the doctor accidentally nicked his temporal artery. So that means squirting with pressure. And my dad, well, this was my dad, and he almost bled out right there in front of my mom. And so he came to me at that point, knowing what I did, not fully wanting to ever engage in that medicine. And he said, what do I need to do? Because I'm never having them cut on me again. And so he started using the oil, and his cancer went away. And it was very interesting that when he went to get renewed, and you might find this interesting as well, Emily, when he went to get renewed, because he didn't have cancer, couldn't get his card. And so he had to wait. And when my dad called me and was happy that he finally had a positive cancer result again a few months later so that he could get his card, I was really upset. So there is something about the cancer. When if you're able to get that in remission, or you're able to get it under control, you need to keep going with what's working. And it did work for him, and it continues to do so.
And I will say, and I'm going to call on this gentleman next, but let me just say this really very quickly, because we're doing a lot now with Alzheimer's. And we have a neuroscientist in Ohio who says that if you've used cannabis in your 20s and 30s, you're not going to die of Alzheimer's disease. You're going to die of something else.
Good luck.
Everything, that I've looked at, and like I said, what I did in Arizona in trying this case allowed me to pull the screen and see, what they really don't know. And their best scientists, they hired the University of Arizona, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and brought them in, and they can't win. We win these cases because we can prove at a minimum it's a palliative benefit, and then we go from there. So that's sort of my thought is, as long as you can prove that it's a palliative benefit at least, then we'll eventually arrive at the opportunity to do studies that will show its therapeutic value. Yes, sir.
Thank you. This is building on the cancer theme. So my wife is a stage 4 cancer patient, and really traditional methods have run out. So we're beyond that. So we're trying all sorts of holistic and natural things, and she has also trying marijuana. A couple of things. One is trying to find, she's a very analytical person as well, so trying to find any evidence around it. She has leiomyosarcoma, if that means anything to people, and she also has MDS, so she has problems with bone marrow generating cells. Are there any information sources on studies or even anecdotal sources? And secondly, while she has supportive medical professionals, they're really no help in guiding her. She feels very much on her own, or with the grower, who's providing the plant. I mean, she's effectively her own doctor in this. If there are anybody we live in Santa Fe who could help guide her through this at the moment, any thoughts on that would be very helpful. She's doing Rick Simpson at the moment.
Best place to go to find research is probably pubmed.org or pubmed.gov. PUBMED. That's the National Institutes of Health Library of Medicine database. Also, you can go to science.iowamedicalmarijuana.org, and Iowa Medical Marijuana is all one word. That was a website that we put together for the Iowa Board of Pharmacy. It's got full text reviews there that you can take a look at. And after the Board of Medicine or the Board of Pharmacy in Iowa reviewed that, they recommended that their legislature allow medical access to cannabis. But it's got a strong section on cancer at that section also.
And any physicians in New Mexico helpful?
Not that I'm aware of in terms of cancer, unfortunately.
There's a number in California that are specializing in some cancer therapies. The reality is, even when it comes to the research, there's no trials on humans. But we have shown, within mouse rat models, the activation of, as he said, caspase pathways and mitochondrial death, apoptotic pathways, which are allowing cells to die. That being said, cancer is not one disease. It's obviously a huge range of diseases. And even within cannabis, I don't think that there's one treatment that suits all. Some people were giving 500 milligrams and seeing good results, and some people are taking thousands and thousands and not necessarily seeing the results that we want. So, yeah, it's hit and miss. Best of luck to you, and I'm sure anyone up here would be happy to take your information and help you any way we can.
We have time for 2 or 3 more questions and before we recess, and then I'm sure others will be happy to answer questions individually. This gentleman.
Speaking of bottlenecks, we jumped over the bottleneck of this state not having anywhere to analyze and qualify the marijuana that's being sold. And when we asked about it last week, when we were told that there was no, we started, for the first time, my wife's dealing with cancer right now, and when we started at the beginning of this month, or last month, we were told that there was no, that the state university was not doing it anymore, nobody's doing it anymore, and then you go on without explaining, well, what the hell, if we're required to have analyzed marijuana, then what are we doing? It's a catch-22.
It's a terrible situation, and I think it can be resolved pretty quickly. The crazy thing is to have be reliant on labs that are starting up specifically for cannabis. We're trying to reinvent the wheel. I mean, we've got people, there's groups that test all sorts of agricultural products. I feel like it's a responsibility of the Department of Health to take care of this, and I mean, the Department of Health can do testing too.
What's the problem with testing for metals at Lano?
The problem is it's a Schedule 1, and you need to have a license to even possess any sort of Schedule 1. And it's completely ridiculous. And unfortunately, what we see, even in the testing sphere in other states, is rather than it be mandated by the government, we have private corporations coming in and setting up labs. And they're not necessarily having the best concerns of the patients at heart either. They want to keep their business going and make a profit off of testing for this product. It is an issue. I think New Mexico has taken some amazing steps forward in actually mandating the testing. Now we need to figure out where that's going to be done. I, as a scientist, am going to push forward and look to how we can actually get that done in a very efficacious and cost-effective way. Because, like you, if I'm going to buy something, honestly, I don't care if you want to grow 3 tomato plants in your backyard and eat those tomatoes. But if you want to sell them to me, I want to know that they're tested, that they're safe, and that they are what you say they are. And I don't think this industry should be any different than that. And they have to provide us the ability to provide that information to you, or it's definitely just a catch-22 at this point.
Well, you made a point just a minute ago that scared the BJ's out of me when you said that some people respond and with a little bit, and some don't respond with a whole lot. And it seems to me that is the point here about getting a standard and identifying what it is we're popping.
That is the point, but really what we preach in the cannabis industry is, first of all, we know that this medicine is safe and it's not going to kill you even if you overdose. Secondly, the word that you...
It's going to save our lives. I don't care if it kills me.
Right. I'm not sure if it's going to save your life, but the methodology that we preach is really titration. Start small and find what's working for you, and if you can tolerate more or need to tolerate more, then go up to that. Because as we see, one person can inhale half a gram and be completely loopy, and other people don't even feel the effects of that medicine. So yeah, it is very a personal sort of medication type choice, and we do preach the titration method, meaning a little bit more, and then you'll find what works for you.
And just so you know that hold on a
Do
second.
we have any steps in place going on towards getting this testing going?
Yes.
Are we just all waiting for somebody else to do something?
There is one private lab, right, already?
Yeah. So there is some testing we can do. We can't do the heavy metals testing, But I was talking with Darryl, and he had some really good protocols, standard operating procedures of things we can test. So we can test our water, we can test our soil, and he's going to help us develop protocols so that even though there is no method of testing the plant material right now, we can test the other inputs and look at our outputs. So at least have be able to feel good that, you know, we do not have heavy metals. We do the microbial testing, we do the cannabinoid profile, so it tells us the plant has 18% THC and 1% CBD. So.
And just so you know, that's the standard testing that's done in a lot of states. The heavy metals is a more recent phenomenon. Okay, we had a question
right here
here.
in the front. Let her
Okay.
ask a question.
I have another question about dosage. I'm at stage 4 ovarian cancer and have gone through the traditional treatments, and I'm now doing cannabis. I mean, it's one thing for you to say that this is a personalized treatment. I don't have any pain, and so the treatment for somebody like me, I'm trying to do tumor reduction. And of course, there are these statements that one should do at least 1 gram, but what's that based on? I mean, I find myself looking at, I'm at about 404, I don't know, I do about 4 milligrams. I'm up to about 4 milligrams. I just started 2 months ago.
And it's all entirely anecdotal at this point. There's in the latest issue of Kerpel magazine, there's a woman who reports that she was able to cure her breast cancer using the size of a grain of rice every day with the Rick Simpson oil. Rick Simpson with lung cancer, they're recommending a full gram a day of this oil. For my own patients, in terms of PTSD, I have people who can use a tiny bit of cannabis at night and they're fine. Other people who have to use it throughout the day. It's very individualized, and it's not a guarantee that everybody's going to respond, unfortunately.
Well,
Just like with any medication, I mean, there are people who do not respond well, and we can't make any guarantees as to how it's going to help any individual. It's up to, just like with any medication that we use in medicine, it's a crapshoot. I mean,
okay,
we see a lot better, more consistent results
I had a
potentially.
question. I had a question that went with that, and it was, is it possible to have like a forum on one of your web pages where patients with different medical conditions could converse with each other?
There are many. There are many of these forums out there. I'm sure if you look up, type in your condition, specifically with the word cannabis and marijuana, you will probably find some sort of support group out there. Probably not within your state. But the reality is that when it comes to cancer, we don't know the treatment, so like chemotherapy and radiation, you want to hit it as hard as possible and see what you can take, and probably see if there's any results. Do scans, like we were saying. Go to your doctor, get him to actually look at the results that you're receiving.
I will get a PET scan in another 6 weeks. I was just looking for an arena where it's possible to communicate with other people, with other patients that have the same conditions.
Are you on Facebook at all? Okay, well, okay, on Facebook, hook up or connect to the New Mexico Medical Cannabis Patients Alliance. That's the organization I'm the vice president of. That's the Facebook forum is a place where for people that are patients can dump information when they find articles, when they find something that's pertinent to something that they're dealing with or someone in their family is dealing with. We also have a website, and you just have to Google New Mexico Medical Cannabis Patient Alliance to find our website. Unfortunately, we're having a little bit of problem with the website right now. We're working with our webmaster right now to get that fixed. But on that site, we do have forums. And so we do have forums for different topics on that site. And some of them are more in depth than others. We have about 1,000 patients that are active communicating on the website and through Facebook right now. We have about 12,000 some patients in the state right now, so we're trying to get more. But that is one place where there are some local, there's some local information. Most of it's, when you get into the forums, it's going to be anecdotal, obviously, because we can't do testing on humans. But you will also be able to find studies that have been done on mice, rats, other things, and so there is a lot of information there, and it's kind of a clearinghouse for studies from other countries also.
Right, maybe a couple more questions, and whoever was hand up back there, if you can get him a mic.
I just wanted to let you know
You just have to hold it close.
I'm a patient from Sacred Garden for a little over a year now, and I had horrible, intractable, refractory status epilepticus, far beyond just a seizure here and there. You know, full-blown 20 milligrams of Versed, 10 milligrams of Ativan, gas phenobarbital to get him stopped about 5 days a week. I was almost a vegetable until coming to Sacred Garden, and I've had about a 90% reduction. So I've taken, thanks them, thanks Zeke and Heather and all these guys over here. But anyways, what I've noticed is that when I first started out, of course, everything was, and I smoked pot since I was a teenager, you know, all the way through. I didn't realize I was treating my epilepsy the whole time. But anyways, I had an addiction problem. I quit doing everything, and that's when my seizures got really bad. I had no idea that when I stopped everything and stopped cannabis, that the cannabis was helping for all those years. But anyways, now I advise parents who have children who are nonverbal in different countries even. And what I'm finding out is that it's not so much the CBD THC thing that you hear on CNN. Is I have patients basically that I advise who are on every different strain, every different ratio. I have a 4-month-old boy who is seizure free on 27% ChemDog, and then I have another patient. I have another patient who is needs a 30 to 1 CBD to THC. With the same diagnosis, both have Dravet. But what I'm noticing is that the terpenes, the way they react to them, is what makes me react. I buy my bud from Sacred Garden, and I make keef out of it, and I make my extracts myself at home with the keef from it. But when I sift, I noticed I wasn't having seizures every single time. And the house was, full of it when you're shaking a pollen box, you know, and those smells come out. And I started doing extracts with just a little bit of glycerin and a little bit of the keef. And keef really holds a lot of terpene value.
I hate to press you for a question, but I'm getting daggers from our tech guys
Oh, okay.
telling me that
Just real quick, I wanted to ask, I know terpenes are precursors to the cannabinoids. However, are there actual therapeutic terpenes that are known to be anticonvulsant?
Absolutely. Beta-caryophyllene, CB2 receptor agonist, published literature 2009, 2010. Again, can be isolated from at least 20 different species of plants. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head when it comes to terpenes, and you know, terpenes are specifically what I'm breeding for. And you know, we've got doctors in California that have been treating Dravet kids for 15, 20 years. This actually isn't that new, and the CBD craze, in a sense, is largely because of the stigma against the THC molecule and that it gets you high. In my opinion, many people getting high is the actual medication as well. It's not a side effect of the medication. That is what you want. So,
this is
and if my child, for instance, was seizuring out and THC is going to work instead of CBD, I don't care. I would rather have them high and happy than seizing out. So I don't think that we should be having this stigma against THC or CBD, but more exploring what the combinations, the ratios of those molecules to the terpenes are having.
I just tell a parent, I'm like, go with what works, and it's like responding to a food. What smells good, you're gonna like. It's gonna taste good. What smells bad doesn't. And I work with growers who are amazing growers who are just getting into extracting and working with patients. And I tell them to make these little glycerin extracts out of each different variety they have, and literally just put it under the child's nose. And all the growers have been like, oh my gosh, they're like, the kid smiled at this strain and he's seizure free. And I'm like, man,
We've seen the same thing with PTSD. You guys recognize the terpene profile that's working for them.
Oh, cool. All right, I just wanted to note the expert opinion, because for me it's anecdotal, but it's the way I advise my patients. I'm like, take what smells good and don't really worry. Be responsible with your dosing, but what you respond to the best, what you see your child responds to the best, is going to be good. Don't worry about the CBD.
Thank you for those great questions. And I want to take a minute as we're closing our ceremony tonight, our seminar tonight. There's some younger folks. Of course, everybody to me is a younger folk, unfortunately. But there's some, and they're standing in the back. I encourage you all to look back. That's some of the amazing staff at Sacred Garden. And I had the pleasure to spend some time with them yesterday, a few hours of time with them yesterday. And it's remarkable what a beautiful, wonderful, caring, compassionate group that they have. I encourage you, after the event, if you have questions, they're more than happy to meet you at the dispensary to set some time and answer questions and do the best that they can to help for your needs. But these are some amazing, wonderful people that both what's his name, Zeke and Kelly. It's been a long night.
Hey, Yahoo.
Yeah, big whatever, But anyways, but he and Kelly, and I want to thank Sacred Garden for the opportunity to bring this information to Santa Fe and to our few guests here from out of town. Thank you so much. What I always try to preach, and let me just say the final as we close, is keep an open mind. That's the problem that we have in general about cannabis, is because we have too many people that are closed-minded and they're not open to receiving this information. Now that you have the information, please share it with others. We started off the program asking cannabis why. I'm here to tell you, after all the work I've done and the research I've done, I say cannabis, why not? Thank you all for joining us, and have a safe ride home.